Good evening, everybody, to this latest AHD webinar on BTV. We'll just wait for a minute or two as people join. Right, well, we'll make a start. Thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar on Bluetongue. Just to let you know that there is, at the top right-hand corner, there is a sort of square box with a question mark in it. That's the one you can put questions in. And we're going to welcome questions right from the start. The format of this webinar is slightly different in that we're having a panel discussion. We're going to use the questions that you give us partly to shape we've got an overall shape of the thing, but partly to shape the direction of where we're going with this. So please feel free to submit questions. We may not get round to them all. There's an alternative way of getting answers to questions. There's an email in the Ruminant Health and Welfare website that you can use to ask any detailed questions. And if you put those there, we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as we can. At the end of this, because this is a different format, there are no presentations. It's a discussion. We'd very much value getting feedback on whether this has worked for you, what issues that you've had. So there's a feedback form at the end of the webinar when we close it down. So if you could kindly fill this form in, it's really useful to inform how we do future webinars. So it's a panel. So I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves with who they are and what they do, so that you are aware of where we're coming from. So I'll start with me. I'm Gareth Haitley. I'm a retired vet. I'm on the board of the British Cattle Veterinary Association. I'm an officer of the British Veterinary Association Scottish branch, and my background is disease surveillance within APHA. So next on my screen is Christina.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Cristina Ruiz. I'm a veterinary advisor in the APHA field epidemiology team, and I actively work on outbreak, so heavily involved in Bluetongue, avian influenza, and others.
Thanks, Christina. Next is Kevin.
Hi, yeah, I'm Kevin Harrison. I'm a sheep farmer down near Bath in the West Country.
Thanks, Kevin. Pilar.
Hello, I'm Pilar Romero. I'm a veterinary advisor for epidemiology within the Epi and Risk team, and I am an epidemiologist on an analytical role, and I lead on the Bluetongue portfolio.
Thanks, Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Batten. I'm the head of the non-vesicular reference laboratories here at Pirbright, and we're responsible for the national reference laboratory for Bluetongue, so very much the laboratory response to this outbreak.
Thanks. Richard?
Good evening. Richard Heppel, veterinary epidemiologist and also part of the APHA field epidemiology team, working mainly on exotic diseases. I was around from the first detection of Bluetongue 8 in 2007 up till country freedom, and then obviously involved again in the last couple of years.
And lastly, but not leastly, Neil.
Thanks, Gareth. Good evening, everyone. I'm Neil Shand, Chief Executive of the National Beef Association. Remember bits and pieces, perhaps, of the Bluetongue outbreak that Richard refers to, 2007-8, and have been very actively involved in the DEFRA core group since October 23 with this current outbreak.
Yeah, Neil reminds me, I also sit on the core group, so a fellow core group member. So just briefly to give you a bit of background and the direction of travel, if you like, with this. we're at a stage now where we are in the sort of second big year of Bluetongue. We've recently had extension of the restriction zone, which was limited to the right-hand side of the country, which took in about something like 17% of the animals in England. That's now been increased to include the whole of England, and the driver for that has been to facilitate movement of animals and trade. However, that does mean that there is the potential for the disease to move within the whole of that area. The midges will move, they might come across from the channel, but animals can now freely move. So there's a potential for the disease to move to the Scottish and Welsh borders. And that has implications for all of us, not just in England, but also in Wales and Scotland. So we're at a stage in the disease cycle, which happens every year as infection levels build up. But we have a window now where potentially people can get on and vaccinate. And so what we want to do is give you as much information as we can to facilitate that decision-making process for you to consider and use vaccination. And we're going to use information that's in the public domain that is present both from the UK, but also in the Netherlands in particular. There's two main reasons for doing that. Firstly, the Netherlands have had earlier experience of this disease. They're, if you like, ahead of us in the disease curve. And there's a lot of experience that's been built up in the intervening period. The second thing is that they have some interesting data based on mortality, which they have, good solid data that will help inform the potential for this disease to cause mortality. So that is of relevance to us because we're if you like one step behind. So what we propose to do is to with that scene setting is to get understanding as much as possible from the Netherlands experience, and also the previous experience that we had in 2006-7 in terms of Bluetongue 8, different serotype. And then what we're going to do is have a discussion around the implications of the disease from that. Then we'll move on to vaccination within the UK itself. We're fortunate to have Kevin with us, and also Neil, Kevin's going to speak in his own right. Neil's going to speak on behalf of another farmer, who will illustrate why they've vaccinated, what the drivers for them were, what the implications have been for them. So that'll be the second sort of section of it, and then we'll sort of have a little wrap up on what we're planning to do in the future with getting information out to you on Bluetongue. So that's the broad format. So we'll move quickly on to the first section, which is looking at the findings of the Dutch experience with Bluetongue and in BTV8 in the UK. Now, I mentioned the mortality data in Holland. This is particularly useful because in Holland there's a centralized system of collecting fallen stock, and they keep very good records, and they've noticed an increase in the number of deaths relative to previous years, and their reports are of over 65,000 sheep deaths occurred in the Netherlands in 2024, and that's despite vaccination. Now, we'd like to unpick that a little bit. So perhaps Carrie, you could sort of come in first on unpacking the use of vaccination. I think we one of the things that we were aware of is that only about 50% of sheep holdings used vaccine in 2024, and perhaps that might be a reason for the increased mortality. Have you got a comment on
Yep.
that, Carrie?
Yeah, so the situation in the Netherlands was that they were able to access vaccine for their sheep population relatively early last year, but uptake was slow. The difficulty with Bluetongue is, despite it being more devastating to the sheep population, cattle are a main reservoir for the disease, and the cattle were then actually vaccinated much later and required 2 doses. The outbreak started very early in 2024, probably as a result of overwintering from 2023. So there was a long period of time where animals weren't vaccinated and the virus was already circulating and it was already ramping up to a very high level within the midge population. When you then take into account that the livestock density is and the farms are very, very close together, midges didn't have to move very far to move to another host. So there was a very rapid sort of ramping up of the outbreak. This year, they are already vaccinating. They've been vaccinating again this year very thoroughly. Belgium have put in place a mandatory vaccination program, really to try and reduce the amount of infection that will be present in the midge population.
Great, thanks. Any other comments? Just colleagues, just chip in. I think you mentioned about vaccine takes time to have effect. What we know on the current vaccines is that they're either 1 or 2 doses. If it's 1 dose in sheep, then you need to allow time for the vaccine to have effect, and that's 3 weeks. If it's 2 doses, it's the 3-week period between the doses plus another 3 weeks, so that's 6 weeks. So we need to be thinking ahead before we get full protection of animals.
However, Gareth, it's probably useful to point out that in cattle, even after 1 dose, the immune system has been primed. So if those animals were then to get infected after that first dose, they would already have a level of the ability to produce the antibodies that are needed to help clear the infection. So the immune system is primed after first dose, but it's the full 2 doses to get to the point where the manufacturers would say that the animal is gone through the full regime.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Pilar, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it's this timing is everything, isn't it? Because the vaccines started being available in May 2024, but the first cases were reported in June, and they really dedicated all the doses available to sheep. They really prioritized sheep, and some reports are 70-80% coverage. I think that the different reports in cattle it was lower, 45%, but it's thankfully it's 1 dose is in sheep, so that will speed things up. I agree with Carrie that partially vaccinated is better than non-vaccinated at all.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that has been asked is what about natural immunity? Aren't the animals going to be protected, particularly in the old RZ? They've met disease already, haven't they? So do you need to vaccinate still? Anybody want to cover that one?
Happy to come in with that. So Bluetongue is a vector-borne disease. It's not contact transmission. So although you may have had some infected animals in 2024, not all the animals on the farm will have been exposed or infected with Bluetongue. So you can see repeated infections on the same farms at different time points. So you wouldn't find farms with 100% infection unless there's a very small volume of animals or a small number of animals that had all been in a very similar location and all just so happened to incorporate those midges that were infected. So you do see these sort of cycles even within a farm of repeated infections. So you cannot assume that all your animals are protected because they were in the east of the country last year.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think the take-home message, one of the take-home messages from what both in the Netherlands and here is we need to vaccinate both cattle and sheep. The cattle are the multiplier of this disease. They're much bigger. They produce a lot more CO2. They've got hair rather than fur. They're more likely to be bitten. So, and when they are bitten, they produce a lot more virus. So both cattle and sheep we need to vaccinate in order to get best control of disease. And the second take home for me was if you've had disease, there's no guarantee that every animal will have seroconverted. In other words, produced immunity to the disease. And this comes out of also some of the Dutch papers that have been presented that show that the strongest means of control is vaccination combined with natural infection. So anybody else want to comment on that? Pilar, did you want to come in?
I think Neil was first.
All right, go Neil.
With a hand up.
So, Gareth, I was going to ask probably Pilar and probably Carrie, just on the previous comments about, animals that have been exposed and tested positive alongside natural immunity. Do we have some, easy numbers that we can relate to attendees on, pre-movement testing? At times 30, 40 animals were tested, but very few actually tested positive. Is that a good indicator of, how localized within a flock or herd that the disease can be? And while I've got the mic, one of the early questions, Gareth, in the chat is, will this be available later? So the answer, Carol, to that is yes, there will be a recording of this available at a later date. So thanks, Gareth.
On that, I will say that unless you test the whole herd or the whole flock, you do not know. And we have not gone back on any pre-movement test positive. We have not gone back to the herd and test the rest. Only in certain occasions we have done that, and we have some in-depth studies in a few herds, but by and large we cannot tell what else was there. We also have evidence that there have been 2 animals out of a batch of 30 odd cattle, for example, the first case of this season, but also we don't know others that may have been somewhere else that the farmer didn't intend to move and therefore don't get tested. We don't know what's going on in those.
Yeah,
because
so
cattle usually is not showing clinical signs as much as sheep. So particularly in cattle, we cannot rely so much on clinical signs, although we have seen them. We see them now.
Yeah. So I think the message there is that we haven't got the resource to test every single animal. There's limited resource, so we've got to work with what we've got. I think is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. But on the antibody presence, the effect of vaccination, particularly on dairy cattle, is based on the level of antibodies in it. So the more antibodies you have, over 50% versus under 50% and no antibodies at all, the higher the level of antibodies, either by previous exposure or vaccination, the more protection effect you have.
Yeah, thanks. Perhaps I could bring Richard in for the experience in BTV8, because there are some differences between 3 and 8 in terms of what the claims are from the vaccine manufacturers. The different between BTV8 and BTV3. So we managed the disease outbreak in the UK in a different way. So perhaps you could come in there and just explain the differences, because I think it's useful for people to know. To hear that.
Well, I think because BTV3 vaccine has been developed at considerable pace, not all the companies are claiming complete sterile immunity from it. I mean, going back to 2007-8, when we got hold of a vaccine, there was a very good uptake of and wide coverage in the areas that had been initially hit by disease. Very good uptake, administration of vaccine, and that undoubtedly stopped disease spreading further westwards at that point.
Yeah, and I'm old enough to remember all that as well. And that did certainly enabled us to roll out a vaccine in a different way to actually get levels high enough to suppress disease. We're in a different situation.
Yeah, I mean,
because we haven't got those claims. They may well come, but we haven't got those claims yet on with all the current vaccines, and so that means we can't. Go on.
Yeah, and at that point we were initially we were having to prioritise and roll it out because of the limited doses coming, roll it out sort of county by county, looking at livestock density, area, risk of infection, etc. But yeah, there was certainly initially in those immediate areas in and around the southeast, very good uptake.
Yeah, thank you. So we're using and deploying vaccine in a different way with this current BTV3 outbreak compared with how we were able to use it in 2007. And the use of vaccine is still voluntary. There's no compulsion to use vaccine, but we need to make sure that everybody's as informed as possible so they make the accurate choices that support their businesses. Carrie, perhaps we could just go back to the Netherlands experience, and we mentioned earlier about the Netherlands being further ahead in terms of the disease. I think it'd be useful for people to understand a bit more about that and what we mean about the Netherlands being, or us being a year behind. Could you cover that off?
Yeah, I'm happy to try. So the Netherlands had an outbreak in the summer of 2023. So they already had a level of transmission and circulation and infection of BTV3 in 2023. We had a few sporadic cases, as you may recall, in the 2 temporary control zones that were put in place in late 2023. And in essence, Bluetongue got into the UK through an incursion of midges from the Netherlands in 2023, but it got in late in the year, which meant it didn't have the right conditions to be able to, if you like, take off in the midge population. So in 2024, the Netherlands certainly had overwintering of the disease, and the virus rapidly replicated in their midge population and transmitted to local hosts. From, as Pilar said earlier, from June onwards. We then detected our first cases again relatively late last year, the end of August, again in the East Coast, and then saw circulation in our own midges and infections in the east of the country from sort of August through September. But again, it wasn't a long season in reality. We know that the midge population starts rising sort of towards April, May time, and with temperatures increasing, we then get to the point where Bluetongue could transmit within the midges. This year, we have seen cases from July the 11th. So we have quite a long season ahead of us. We're not even at the point where we saw Bluetongue last year, which was the end of August. So I think we are behind the curve. There is a risk that we will see a rapid increase in the number of infections over the coming weeks. And certainly the midges will, within England, still be able to transmit the disease through most of September until they start, if you like, reducing in numbers because of the cooler temperatures that will come with autumn and then into winter. So there is certainly a need to vaccinate and start thinking about trying to prime these animals to be able to respond to infection. And in reality, we will still be dealing with the disease into late September, without a doubt.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. So there's sort of 2 issues there. One is the build-up of infection that occurs as the season goes. So even though we're not seeing much in the way of clinical signs or clinical disease at the moment, that will build up as time goes on, particularly as we've got more animals potentially exposed to the disease. The other thing is that we're behind, just to reflect what you said, we're about a year behind the Netherlands in terms of the overall course of the cycles each year as they go. So we need to be very careful that we aren't complacent about this disease.
And
so
I think, Gareth, we also need to realise that it's not just the Netherlands, right? Belgium has seen the same picture. Yeah. Parts of France have seen the same picture. Germany certainly saw the same picture. So there isn't any reason to think that we will, or the UK herd will respond any differently. We have the same midges. We have similar breeds. So I think we do need to be thinking that we could see a similar clinical picture once infection gets into the more animal dense regions.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Pilar.
Yes, and to add to that, we don't only have to worry about midges coming from the near continent this year, since the 9 cases that we have already discovered in the new season are not linked to incursions there. They're from infected midges already here. So there are kind of 2 fronts that we can get Bluetongue, if you like.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Neil.
Yeah, Gareth, I would just like to encourage some of the attendees to keep adding to the questions in the question box, but also to let us know what their challenges to vaccination are. Because obviously part of this tonight is to really try and find sound and good foundations to create a strong vaccination campaign, but we'd like to know what the industry challenges are. Obviously, we're aware vaccine was limited in the springtime, and if I refer to, let's say the bovine side, before cows and calves went outside, there was a limit in availability of vaccine. Vaccine is now readily available, but cows and calves are outside. But we just try and build a picture of what resistance there is, if there is resistance, to get cattle vaccinated. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. We're sort of coming to the end of this section now. There is a question that's come up. If you have an all year round dairy herd that is always housed with no direct contact to other cattle or sheep and low history of exposure to Schmallenberg, would you, and I presume by that they're sort of implying there might not be so many midges, I'm not sure. Would you still recommend vaccination? Does anybody want to pick up on that one?
Yeah, I would say that there has been a study published only on the 30th of July that look at the field use of vaccination and the impact of it. And one of the confounders in the study was the grazing status of the herd. So even accounting for grazing, the study showed a positive impact of vaccinating, and they were dairy cattle herds in the Netherlands. And there were positive impacts on lack of testing for Bluetongue, because at the time the early warning system that they had was any practice that suspect can submit samples, so less testing, less positives compared to the non-vaccinated, and less use of anti-inflammatory drugs, so less affected cows. And that was if one vaccine was used in particular. So definitely, irrespective of whether your cattle are mainly indoors or not, there's advantages to vaccinating.
Yeah, thank you for that. Someone has also put, would it be possible to have a link to this study emailed or in the chat? So perhaps we should think about, if we are referring to papers that are in public domain, perhaps we should, I think we'll need to find a way of getting those out to people, and perhaps through the Ruminant Health and Welfare route might be the best one. I don't know what, whether anybody else got any thoughts on that, but I think that would be helpful. Yeah. So I think key takeaways from that section for me is, it's there's no doubt that the outbreak in the Netherlands has been devastating. That we are a year behind in terms of the course of the disease relative to what's been seen on the continent. And as Carrie's already said, it's not just the Netherlands; it's France and Belgium and other countries. And we do have a window to vaccinate against Bluetongue 3 now to avoid a similar sort of scenario. And I think the actions for people is, talk to your vet, and vets speak to your clients. Vaccination will help protect our stock and prevent the mortality figures such as those seen in the Netherlands. But before we close on that section, there's one question that's just popped up, which is very relevant, which is one persistent obstacle is the belief that BTV8 vaccine caused infertility. Do we have data that could shed light on this? And I'll bring Richard in on that because he's got info on that. Oh, his microphone's not working. Yeah. So
I mean, I would say that we have not had adverse effects reported on that sense. And in fact, we met with our EPI colleagues in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, and it's data that is not published, but similar to the tables that you would have seen on the positive effect of vaccination in reducing mortality and clinical signs. They have a similar table on fertility in cattle, and that has been positive as well. So I don't know if Richard is able to comment on the BTV8 experience.
Yeah, is your mic working now, Richard? No.
No.
That's a shame. So the short answer is yes. There are papers that show that there is no impact of BTV8 vaccine on fertility, other than the use of vaccine very close to the foot. So if you've got animals that are in early pregnancy, whatever vaccine, this has nothing to do with it being a Bluetongue vaccine, whatever vaccine you use, if you're vaccinating animals too close around the implantation period, say when they're in early pregnancy, that will have an impact. It's nothing to do with Bluetongue. It's to do with the use of a vaccine, and that's to do with the handling of the animals, the possibility of very small fever spikes that could impact the animals. This from Philip Thomas. It's an important question to ask, and it's an important question to answer. Remember that all vaccines are produced to very high standards of quality, safety, and efficacy in this country and abroad, and these things are taken extremely seriously. And there is no evidence that BTV8 vaccine caused significant problems, other than the small numbers of individual animals that might have been vaccinated at a less than optimal time, and there's no reason to believe that BTV3 vaccines, which are produced using the same methods, would be any different. So I think we can be. That's probably as firm as we can be on that one. So someone has also asked, can the table showing fertility impacts be put on the Rumen Health and Welfare Hub? It's a really common question from farmers. So yeah, I think we'll look into that one as well. Thanks. So due to my pretty useless chairing, we're now a little bit behind. I'd like to move on to the vaccination in the UK and get the experience of some guys who've been using the vaccine. And the first one is Kevin Harrison. He vaccinated his ewes in February and lambs in June. So, Kevin, if you can explain, what were your reasons for vaccinating? What was the driver? How's it gone? Have you had experience of Bluetongue? Just if you could talk us through your experience, please.
Okay, yeah. So no, we haven't had experience with Bluetongue, but it was a long winter of contemplation on when and if, and whether we could justify it. There wasn't a lot. There was a lot of unknowns as farmers, as in what would the infection rate be, and what would the mortality rate be, what effect would it have on the sheep, what if they did recover from it, or what would I have to deal with if they all got it. So there was lots of stuff mulling around in my mind. I worked very closely with a flock health advisor as well, and other peer groups. So it wasn't a journey I took on my own. It was certainly through a lot of discussion. And obviously we're over in the West Country, not quite down in the southwest near the coast. So you can feel that you're a long way away from it. But then as we came out of the winter and lambing was approaching, we decided that the best bet, because I'm quite risk averse, really. I think that's right. The thought of having to look after, we've just started a new flock. We've changed breeds and everything, and a closed flock. We just started a flock which is quite young. There's been a lot of work over 3 years, and the thought of something coming in and devastating that didn't sit well with me, and the thought of having to deal with a lot of infected sheep that aren't going to recover. Some of the stories I'd seen didn't sit well either. So I'm always been proactive when it comes to animal health and like to prevent things rather than react to things. I was lucky enough to see a German vet do a talk on how it had affected in Germany, and there was one little section in the middle of Germany where the vet practices had been really proactive about getting vaccinated, and the cases in that area were really low. So I thought, you know, I think it's going to be worth doing so, and certainly one to do our bit, one to protect our own flock and our own businesses and income, and two to help sort of nationally try and keep the disease at ebb. So with the help of my flock advisor, we decided to go in just before the Heptavac. So we sort of did it 2 weeks before the Heptavac. We're very fortunate. I got a vaccination fridge on the grant scheme last year, so I could store vaccines with confidence. But so we decided to do it 2 weeks before the Heptavac, and then we went in with the Heptavac after that, with a slight knowledge. We didn't have a lot of evidence of whether any would be passed on to the lambs in the colostrum, really. And then obviously we're outdoor lambing. We're quite we're up to about 750. We're quite a steep farm, but we do have lots of water courses and things. And the knowledge of how the midge reacts in our topography, I have no idea really. So I didn't want to take any second guesses on that. And then once the lambs were on the ground and we'd finished lambing, we tagged them all anyway. So that was quite easy. So that with the recording, you have to record your vaccinations. But with the Bluetongue one, I did that between the two clostridial vaccinations. So it was 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and that worked quite well. I did struggle with availability. We did choose one of the vaccines that just is one dose. We did struggle, and I was starting to sweat a bit, but we got it just in time so that it would fit into that window that we planned. Another reason for going in early, I don't know if this is the right platform for this, but the advice is to use a single needle each vaccination. Well, when you've got big numbers, that can be tricky. But the danger of if you're doing it when it's later on, when there's a bigger risk of you infecting other animals with another needle or any other way. So I wanted to get in early before there was a risk, and it went well. I found the recording of all the EIDs on the website very easy. There's been no adverse reactions or anything. I'm glad I've done it. I think it seems a long time ago now, and it was a time you think, well, was I duped? But when you can see what's come, the potential of what's coming down the road this year, I know that I've done all I can to protect my flock from Bluetongue.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I mean, one of the things that I should say here is none of us here on this call want to dupe anybody. This is about controlling a notifiable disease. And it's really good to hear your experience. I mean, if I can pick up on a couple of things that you've said there. One is that you consulted, and that might be a vet, it might be your flock advisor, but you took advice, and I think that's one key take home for me. The second one, just to pick up on, was availability, and we know that there were availability issues early on. We all three governments, the devolved administration governments and England government, have consulted closely with the three manufacturers and have all received assurances that there are no supply issues. So vaccine is freely available in the country at the moment and for the foreseeable. And lastly, another interesting thing you mentioned there is, and I think that this is worth being part of the conversation, is that you got a fridge through the grant scheme, and I think it's worthwhile bearing if there's if there's funding money available, use it for things like this. There's no reason why you can't use it for for Bluetongue control as well as other diseases. And lastly, plan ahead. So don't get vaccine congestion, because there's a lot of pressure on flocks and herds to get vaccines into animals in a seasonal and a timely way. And it sounds as if you've been very careful about getting the timings right, so you've managed to get everything in there in a timely way. So well done.
And the other thing can I just
Go
add
on.
as well is it's not like Smollenberg where this is a farmer's eye view in it. It's not like Smollenberg where you think, well, yeah, we may as well let the midges bite them, early spring going into summer because we're not topping and it won't affect the lambing. This is something that's going to affect the sheep any time of the year if they get bitten by the midges, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, so I'll at this stage I'll bring in Neil, who's going to speak on behalf of another farmer who's vaccinated on the cattle side. So over to you, Neil, and then perhaps if there's any questions that come in, we can come back to those.
Yeah. So thanks, Gareth. And on the back of what Kevin's just told us, I'm going to go back to the foundation of this story and start with the reason why to vaccinate. So we have a farmer on the Suffolk coast who last year saw no signs of Bluetongue virus at all, even though his near neighbours did have positive cases. He only became aware of some challenging issues when he scanned his cows at the end of last year and found of the 97 cows put to the bull, he had 19 empty, which was an unusually high number for him. And then that just rolled over into when calving started, or pre-calving, he had several abortions. A further 4 cows turned out to be empty, and he had a big group of dead calves, and then alive but non-viable calves. They had, as it turns out, serious neurological issues, in many cases had no brain, and they had to be humanely destroyed. The basic numbers, and I'm going to run through this, Gareth, because I'm aware that the clock's ticking tonight. Of the 97 cows he put to the bull, he ended up with 48 calves going out with cows in the springtime. He has obviously vaccinated this year, and he also tested his bulls post-vaccination, and he will be vaccinating, I would think, for the next few years. We're also aware, I did quite a few veterinary meetings over the sort of early spring and into the summer. These non-viable calves and abortion stories ran not just in the eastern counties, but over as far as Hampshire and up into Buckinghamshire. And we are aware now of more people, planning at least to vaccinate in the next few weeks, perhaps, when cows and calves come in. For calves to be given pre-winter vaccines, that would be a good time, I think, to vaccinate cows both times, and then you don't have to handle them in the springtime. More and more stories coming out about non-viable calves across the whole, let's say, southwest of England, really. As I say, as far over at least as Hampshire and possibly into Dorset. So, as I say, this producer has vaccinated everything this year and has subsequently done some early scanning because he calves December, January. So, and the early scanning results are encouraging. So I'll leave it at that, Gareth, and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, so there's a question that's come in about that farm, Neil, which is the farm that Neil is talking about. Did the cattle not show any clinical signs? Was it just fertility issues? So did they see any clinical signs in the cows?
Absolutely no clinical signs, nothing, no, signs on muzzles or any issues with feet or anything last year. Absolutely nothing. But his neighbours, who were, let's say, close to some of the early cases, did have some signs on cattle, but no mortality or anything. But he had nothing. Didn't see anything at all. And that's one of the big worries. It's invisible. That's the big concern.
Yeah. Okay. Christina, did you want to come in?
Yes, just very quickly to support what Neil has just said, we have also studied 5 herds, 2 beef, 3 beef and 2 dairy herds, and we have seen a similar pictures, so no clinical signs, so a history of abortions during the autumn, and then those dummy calves and everything being linked to Bluetongue. So just to say that it's not an isolated cases, there have been more, as he has said, and this is probably only the beginning of the picture.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think another sort of take-home message from that piece has been the impact that it does that has been felt by this particular farm, which has driven vaccination, and that brings me on to the point that. Firstly, if people suspect disease, they must report it. Remember, this is a notifiable disease, so that situation hasn't changed. The other thing is that that the disease can look like Schmallenberg. There are significant overlaps in how the two diseases look like. So it's really important that you get these investigated. Don't make assumptions that it's one or the other. Get them investigated so you know what you're dealing with. So I think those are a couple of take homes. So Richard's got his microphone back. Was there anything you wanted to sort of? I'm sorry you've had problems with your microphone. Is there anything you wanted to add to what we've just said? Sorry, can't hear you. I'm really sorry. Perhaps could you whack it in the chat if you've got a comment, and I'll read that out. Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you now. So say
Right.
something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that thanks for you'd answered the point about the Bluetongue 8 and reported adverse effects. That you answered exactly what I was going to say about that the effects of Bluetongue itself are way worse than any small chance of effects from vaccines, and again administered within that very early stage up to embryonic implantation. So thanks, you covered it all.
Yeah, great. Okay, cheers. Thanks. So we're sort of pretty much back to time now. I'm not seeing any questions that relate to the vaccine, the experience section. So can I just invite Kevin and Neil? Are there any further comments you wanted to make on your experience and your thoughts on vaccination? Go,
I mean,
Neil.
yeah. So just I can't promote vaccine strong enough. I don't think, Gareth. I'll be open enough to say that livestock numbers are being challenged across UK, GB, however you want to look at it. My concern is that the biggest challenge on livestock numbers could come, let's say on the cattle side, from Bluetongue if this escalates to the same degree as was seen in the Netherlands and Belgium. And I understand it wasn't easy to vaccinate in the springtime, but please vaccinate in the autumn and from then onwards.
Yeah,
Please do.
Some people worry about the cost, but when you look at the scheme thing, the big picture, the cost of actually losing performance, losing animals. I think there's a great calculator in there on the AHDB cost calculator on the AHDB website. But the cost to your businesses, your livelihood going forward is much greater than not vaccinating.
Yeah, and thanks very much for mentioning those, Kevin. So there's the cost calculator. There's also a vaccine comparator chart, and there's a decision-making tool which is sheet focused, but it gives the basic principles of, and it helps walk a farm and vet and advisor combo through the decision-making process on the need for vaccination. So those are all on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. So there's a couple more questions have come in. First one is a quick. I'll answer that quickly. Is there any news on BTV12? remember there's been one single animal in the UK that was positive for BTV12. A farmer's worry is that they vaccinate BTV3 and then will need to revaccinate. Can I bring you in, Carrie, just on that one, just to give the a bit more on the Dutch experience and the way this serotype seems to be behaving?
Yeah, I can certainly tell you about what I know. So the Dutch reference laboratory detected a very small number of BTV12 cases while still dealing with the BTV3 outbreak. They had similar experiences of that back in 2008 and 2011, where they also picked up other serotypes circulating while they were dealing with BTV8. The reality of the situation with Bluetongue is there are multiple serotypes circulating in Europe, some of which are more confined to sort of areas of Spain, others to the Balkans. But because it's a midge-borne disease, a vector-transmitted disease, these midges can go where they want to go, and we do see sort of spread of other serotypes moving through Europe. The UK is certainly at risk to BTV8, which is currently in France. We're also at risk to another orbivirus, AHDV, which is also circulating in France. And we and our colleagues at APHA and DEFRA always keep a close eye on what serotypes are, if you like, within the vicinity of the UK. I think with BTV12, again, it was detected quite late in the season. So the Dutch are very hopeful that they won't see it this year. I think we were extremely unlucky to get a case in the UK. We did only detect one case through the annual winter surveillance, although the whole farm, as Pilar has said previously, was not then sampled to see how many cases there may be. But again, it was picked up very late, so we would hope that there wouldn't have been any overwintering here or in the Netherlands. But it is something that we need to remember, that despite dealing with BTB3, we do still need to be looking out for other serotypes, which is why we do need to encourage people to report clinical signs, not only for Bluetongue, but also to rule out other notifiable diseases. So that really is something that we need to look at. And what I can say is the lab very much ensure that when we report a positive, that we know it's BTV3 and we know that it's BTV3 only. We very much look at all results in detail, and are very aware that we need to keep an eye out for anything unusual. What I will say, going back to some to reinforce what Kevin said, some of these early cases that we've seen in England, the sheep have been very sick. It's only small numbers at the moment, but they have all been very unwell. So I think that is something that you need to realise, that it can be really nasty, in particular in sheep.
Sorry, it would help if I unmuted. Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Pilar, did you want to come in? You're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't. I lowered my hand, but didn't mute myself. That particular farm where we detected the single BTV12 positive animal, which was not a co-infection with BTV3, but they have found that in the Netherlands, but not in the UK. We actually went back and sampled everything rather than doing zone surveillance. We tried first to see whether there had been widespread occurrences in the farm, and we didn't find any other cases. The jury is out whether we will have additional incursions, because that's, we don't sample a lot in the winter surveillance. It's not a very exhaustive sampling. So as Carrie has said, we have been quite unlucky, given there have only been 12 cases in the Netherlands. But it seems to be the way BTV12 behaves. It doesn't spread as much as other serotypes in their experience. So we'll see what this year brings.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's helpful. I hope that sort of gives some assurance that it doesn't look as if it's going to take off like other serotypes. There's one question here that's just come in, which is, given what Neil said about problems with fertility, etc., why are some vets in parts of the country suggesting that vaccination is a waste of time? I might blow a gasket answering this one. So does anybody else want to take this one? Or perhaps I
Just,
should just perhaps I should.
sorry, just go ahead and blow a gasket.
Yeah, I just think this is basically wrong. This is an impactful disease, and the whole point about vaccination is that, given what I've said about quality, safety, and efficacy about of controlling how vaccines behave, we know that they're safe. We know that they work. Yes, it might not be 100%, it might be 95%, but the vaccines work and cause much less impact than the disease itself. That's the whole point. We wouldn't be bothering with it if it was otherwise. So I would absolutely refute that. Vaccination is not a waste of time. It is the main control method that we have in controlling this disease now, and I would utterly refute that. They are gasket blown. So,
I agree, Gareth. And if people are discouraged by the mortality figures in sheep in the Netherlands, which were higher on the second year in 2024 compared to 2023, I mean from 55,000 to 65,000 excess mortalities. What they mention in their papers and what they told us is that there was also a very wet year and they had huge problems with ammoncosis as well. So they certainly acknowledge that not all was due to Bluetongue, but it's kind of excess mortalities in the face of that. And they have seen a positive impact on vaccination across the piece, including on fertility, as it was mentioned before.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So we're in the last sort of few minutes of our hour, and one of the things I wanted just to quickly look at is some more of the issues around the sort of myth busting that we've got. So has anybody? One of the things about it is, can we use the vaccine in pregnant cattle? So does anybody want to come in on that one? Or shall I do that? Richard, are you saying anything? Are you able to say anything? Sorry.
Well, yeah, hopefully I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Get on with it.
Yeah. No, I would just go back. The obvious caveat to just be careful. It's just the general handling, as you mentioned, of giving any vaccine, not specifically Bluetongue vaccine, around those earlier stages up to embryonic implantation. And so we have the study from Europe that showed that, and their advice was just avoid it in the 2 to 7 days after service, basically.
Yeah. No, I'd very much echo that. And then there's this infertility in breeding males. I hope we've been able to sort of address that. There is another sort of subsidiary question that we've just had, which is, and this is a good one, I like this. Does anyone have a way of encouraging farmers to vaccinate, which is sort of what I hope we're trying to do? I'm currently in the southwest of Scotland. It's being talked about, but farmers are reluctant as the cases are down south. Rumours circulating about fertility issues on rams coming to the breeding season and the cost. I think certainly cost is an issue for some. But again, the cost of impact is much greater than the impact of the impact of the disease is much greater than the cost of vaccination. Anybody else want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say, sorry, Neil, that Bluetongue type 3 itself causes fertility issues. So in reality, vaccination is probably going to prevent any fertility issues rather than the vaccine causing them itself. So I think that's something that people need to remember. The longer term effects of having an infected bull or an infected ewe or an infected cow, pregnant cow, is the risk of transplacental transmission, which is going to have a much higher impact than if you'd vaccinated in the first place.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else want to come in?
Yeah, Gareth, so a couple of things. So the farmer I mentioned in Suffolk obviously wishes that he'd vaccinated last year. With current cattle values as they are, he's the biggest chunk of £70,000 missing due to disease. The other thing on this question, we're hearing all these stories about fertility issues using the vaccine when we know so far not that many. There's not that much livestock being vaccinated. This is hangover stuff from 2007-8, when it clearly was the disease that created fertility challenge, not the vaccine.
Yeah, and Richard's agreeing on that one as well. Yeah, thank you for that. We've run out of time, so apologies for my shoddy chairing. Just a quick recap on that. I think the clear message is that vaccination is safe. That it is the major means that we have in our armory to control Bluetongue 3. There's time now to get on and vaccinate before the if you like the late summer autumn peak of disease, and also pre the breeding season for sheep and cattle starting. So I think the collective advice is we need to get on and vaccinate. Have those conversations with your vet and vet with farmer, and vaccinate now to prevent losses later. So I think that's the take home that I'm picking up. Again, I'd just point you to the Battle Bluetongue resources on the Ruminant Health and Welfare site, the vaccine comparison tables, the cost calculators, the movement checker. Please use those. Go and look at those and use those to inform your decisions. Lastly, to thank my co-presenters for their contribution, and for you for attending. Again, please do fill in the feedback form, because, as I say, this was a new format. We'd like to see, notwithstanding my rubbish chairing, that is this a useful way of doing it, or do you prefer this, or do you prefer the more sort of standard presentation form? Please do give us feedback on that. It is taken into account. There are 2 more webinars scheduled for the 20th of August and the 3rd of September. Those can be signed up for via the AHDB Webinars page. The subjects for those, although they're related to Bluetongue, will be more will come out in the next few weeks. So watch out for emails that will inform you of that. So with no further ado, thank you all for your contributions. Thank you all for attending, and good night.
Thanks. Good night.